He never saw it coming. On a bustling city sidewalk, a modestly dressed black man waits calmly near a luxury hotel valet. Suddenly, a furious, well-groomed man slaps him across the face, shocking onlookers. Phones capture every moment as the crowd gasps. But this calm man isn't just anyone, he's a hidden billionaire. What happens next will leave everyone stunned, revealing a powerful twist about pride, judgment, and unexpected strength. The city never slept, but that afternoon it seemed to pause, just for a moment, on the crowded sidewalk outside the luxury hotel. Cars honked impatiently. People rushed past with phones pressed to their ears, and the glass towers reflected a sky heavy with heat. No one noticed a tall black man standing calmly near the entrance, dressed in a simple charcoal suit that looked almost out of place among the designer labels and flashing gold watches around him. His shoes were clean but not flashy, his watch modest, his posture relaxed yet dignified. To most eyes, he was invisible, just another man blending into the background of a city that judged worth by appearance. His name was Elias Monroe, though very few people knew it carried weight. Fewer still knew it was attached to companies that controlled shipping routes, tech patents, and investment portfolios spanning 3 continents. Elias didn't advertise his wealth. He had learned long ago that silence was safer than noise, humility stronger than arrogance. Power, when hidden, revealed the truth about people faster than any spotlight ever could. Elias had just stepped out of the hotel after a quiet meeting with an old mentor. He wasn't in a rush. He stood near the valet's stand, checking a message on his phone, when a sharp voice cut through the air. "Hey, you, move out of the way." Elias looked up slowly. The voice belonged to a broad-shouldered man in an expensive blazer, his hair slicked back, his expression already twisted with irritation. He looked like someone used to obedience, someone who believed the world owed him space, simply because he demanded it. "I'm waiting for my car," the man continued loudly, glancing around as if searching for allies. "You people always block the entrance." The words landed heavier than they should have. A few nearby heads turned. Some faces showed discomfort. Others showed curiosity. Elias felt a familiar sting, not of surprise, but of recognition. He had heard variations of that sentence his entire life. "I'm not blocking anything," Elias replied calmly, his voice low and controlled. "I'm standing where the valet asked me to wait." That should have been the end of it. But for the man in the blazer, calm sounded like defiance. "What did you say?" he snapped, stepping closer. "Don't get smart with me." Elias straightened, meeting the man's eyes. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step back. "I said, I'm not in your way." The sidewalk seemed to tighten around them. Conversation slowed. Phones subtly angled upward, sensing something unfolding. The man's jaw clenched, his pride bruised by the simple fact that someone he deemed beneath him hadn't folded. "You think you're important?" the man sneered. "Standing here like you own the place." Elias exhaled slowly. "I don't think I'm more important than anyone else." That answer, measured reasonable, somehow made things worse. In one sudden, shocking motion, the man's hand swung through the air. Slap! The sound was sharp and loud, echoing against glass and stone. It cut through traffic noise, through conversations, through the ordinary rhythm of the street. For half a second, time froze. Elias's head turned slightly from the impact. He tasted blood where his cheek had split against his teeth. The city watched. A woman gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Someone muttered, "What the hell?" Another voice whispered, "Did he just?" The man who had slapped him stood there breathing hard, eyes blazing, not with fear, but with satisfaction, like a child who had just knocked over a tower and expected applause. "That's what happens when you forget your place," the man said loudly. Silence followed, thick, uncomfortable silence. No one laughed, no one clapped, but no one stepped in either. Elias slowly turned his face back forward. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't broken. It was something far more unsettling, composed, thoughtful, almost sad. He touched his cheek, looked at the faint trace of blood on his fingers, then lifted his eyes, not to the man who struck him, but to the people watching. In that moment, memories surged through him. He remembered being 12 years old, standing in a store while a clerk followed him down every aisle. He remembered being stopped by police in his own neighborhood, asked whose car he was driving. He remembered boardrooms where his ideas were ignored until repeated by someone else. All of it lived quietly inside him, layered beneath years of discipline and restraint. The man in the blazer mistook that silence for weakness. Yeah, he scoffed, straightening his jacket. That's what I thought. He turned as if the incident were over, just another assertion of dominance in a world he believed was designed for him. But the city hadn't moved on. A valet stood frozen, keys dangling from his fingers. A security guard near the door frowned deeply. Phones were now openly raised, recording. The air felt charged, waiting for something. An explosion, an apology, a consequence. Elias spoke. "You shouldn't have done that," he said quietly. The man laughed. "Or what?" Elias didn't answer right away. He looked at the hotel entrance, then at the street, then back at the man. His gaze was steady, unreadable. "Or you'll regret it," the man mocked, rolling his eyes. "Please, guys like you always say that." Elias nodded slowly, as if accepting the insult. "Maybe." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a clean handkerchief, and calmly wiped the blood from his cheek. His movements were deliberate, controlled, nothing like the chaos the slap had created. To the crowd, he looked like a man swallowing humiliation. What they couldn't see was a calculation behind his eyes. Elias Monroe had built empires by understanding people, by watching how they behaved when they thought no one important was watching. Moments like this were revealing. Painful, yes, but revealing. The man in the blazer finally noticed the phones. His confidence wavered slightly. "Stop recording." He snapped at no one in particular. "Mind your business." But it was already too late. A black luxury sedan rolled up to the valet stand. The driver stepped out quickly, scanning the area. His eyes landed on Elias, and his posture changed instantly, straightening, respectful. "Mr. Monroe," the driver said, opening the rear door. "Your car is ready." The name floated in the air. Mr. Monroe. It didn't register immediately, but a few people repeated it quietly, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. The man who had slapped Elias frowned. "Who?" he muttered. Elias didn't move toward the car yet. He looked at the man one last time. "You hit me because you thought I was nobody," Elias said evenly. "That's the mistake." The man scoffed, though uncertainty crept into his eyes. "Get lost." Elias finally turned toward the car, but before stepping in, he paused. "I won't forget your face," he said softly, "and neither will the city." As the door closed behind him, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Did you hear how they spoke to him?" Another said, "That wasn't just some random guy." The man in the blazer stood alone on the sidewalk now, the echo of the slap still hanging in the air. But something had shifted. The confidence that fueled his violence began to crack, replaced by an unfamiliar sensation creeping up his spine. Doubt. He didn't know it yet. But that single slap had just collided with a fortune, a reputation, and a man who had nothing left to prove and everything to reveal. The city resumed its rhythm almost instantly after the black sedan disappeared into traffic, but the man left standing on the sidewalk felt as if the ground beneath him had subtly shifted. He told himself it was nothing, just an ugly moment, already fading into the endless noise of the day. Still, the murmurs followed him like shadows. "Did you see the way that driver spoke to him?" "Mr. Monroe, sounds important. Someone's definitely getting fired." The man in the blazer, Grant Holloway, felt irritation crawl up his neck. He hated whispers, hated uncertainty even more. He adjusted his cuffs, lifted his chin, and strode into the hotel lobby as if he owned the place. Confidence, he believed, could crush doubt if worn loudly enough. Inside, cool marble floors and golden lighting wrapped around him. The hotel staff watched him carefully now, their smiles tighter, their eyes sharper. Grant noticed, but misread it as judgment for causing a scene, not fear of consequence. At the concierge desk, he leaned in. "Who was that guy outside?" he asked casually. The concierge hesitated for half a second too long. "Sir, I'm not at liberty to. Just tell me." Grant snapped, slipping a folded bill onto the counter. The concierge didn't touch it. His voice dropped. That was Mr. Elias Monroe. Grant laughed, and the concierge swallowed. The Monroe Group, investments, logistics, technology. The words felt rehearsed, like a warning. Grant's smile faltered. Never heard of him. The concierge met his eyes. Most people haven't. That doesn't mean they should. Grant scoffed, straightening. You're telling me the guy I slapped runs some company? Yes, sir, the concierge said carefully. Several. And he owns his hotel. Silence hit harder than the slap itself. Grant blinked. That's not funny. I'm not joking, the concierge replied. This property is one of many under his private holdings. Grant stepped back slowly, as if the desk had suddenly grown teeth. That's impossible, he muttered. He didn't look. The concierge said nothing. Grant turned sharply and walked away, his heartbeat loud in his ears. His reflection in the polished walls looked different now, smaller somehow. For the first time in years, a question crept into his mind that made him deeply uncomfortable. What if I was wrong? Across the city, Elias Monroe sat quietly in the back seat of his car, the skyline sliding past like a silent film. The driver glanced at him through the mirror. Hospital, sir? He asked gently. Elias touched his cheek again. No. Office. Yes, sir. The car merged into traffic. Elias leaned back, eyes closing briefly, not from pain, but from memory. He hadn't always been invisible by choice. Years ago, his name had been everywhere. Business magazines, conferences, interviews. The attention had come with admiration and with something darker. Assumptions, stereotypes, threats. Investors who smiled in public and doubted him in private. Journalists who asked how it felt to be unexpected. Strangers who believed wealth should look a certain way. So he'd step back, let the companies operate through boards and holding firms. Let others speak while he listened. Power didn't need applause to function. But moments like today reminded him why the disguise worked so well. People revealed their truest selves when they thought you had none. Elias's phone buzzed. A message from Naomi Carter, his chief legal officer. Security flagged an incident outside the Meridian Hotel. Are you all right? Elias typed calmly. I'm fine. Let it unfold. A pause. There's video already circulating. Elias looked out the window. Of course there is, he murmured. Do you want us to intervene? He considered that. He could end it instantly. One call, one signature. One quiet lawsuit that would crush Grant Holloway without a sound. But something about the man's words, know your place, lingered unpleasantly. Not yet, Elias typed. Let him sit with it. Grant didn't sit with it well. By evening, his phone was buzzing nonstop. Missed calls, messages, links. His name was trending for all the wrong reasons. A video clip had already racked up millions of views. Man assaults black executive outside luxury hotel. Public slap turns into corporate nightmare. Grant watched the video again, his stomach tightening. The angle was unforgiving. The sound crisp. His voice clear. His words undeniable. You people always block the entrance. That's what happens when you forget your place. There was no context that could save him. His girlfriend stared at him from across the apartment. What did you do? She asked quietly. It's being blown out of proportion, Grant snapped. He provoked me. She looked back at the screen. By standing there? Grant had no answer. His phone rang again. This time, it was his boss. Grant, the voice said coldly, we need to talk. I can explain. Tomorrow morning. My office. Don't be late. The call ended. Grant dropped onto the couch, sweat beading on his forehead. He had built his career on dominance, on being louder, sharper, more aggressive than everyone else. It had always worked. Until now, what terrified him most wasn't the backlash. It was a memory of Elias Monroe's eyes. No rage, no fear, just certainty. The next morning, Grant sat across from a long glass table in a high-rise office, his resume suddenly feeling like a fragile thing. The executives around him looked tired, angry, embarrassed. This isn't about politics, his boss said. This is about liability. I didn't know who he was, Grant protested. That's the problem. Another executive replied. You didn't care. Grant's boss slid a document across the table. We're placing you on indefinite leave pending investigation. Grant stared at the paper. You're firing me? We're protecting the company. Grant laughed weakly. From what? A misunderstanding. His boss leaned forward. From a billionaire who doesn't need to raise his voice to end us. The words landed heavily. Grant signed. Meanwhile, Elias stood in a quiet conference room overlooking the city. Naomi Carter and two other executives sat across from him. The board wants to know how you'd like to proceed, Naomi said. We have grounds for criminal charges, civil damages, public condemnation. Elias listened patiently. What happens to him if we do all of that? Elias asked. Naomi hesitated. His career is over. His reputation destroyed. Elias nodded slowly. And will that teach him why he was wrong? Silence. Elias stood, walking toward the window. The city sprawled below, millions of lives intersecting, colliding, misunderstanding one another every day. I don't want revenge, Elias said quietly. I want recognition. Recognition? Naomi asked. I want him to understand exactly who he struck, Elias replied, and why it mattered. Naomi's eyes sharpened. You have something in mind. Elias smiled faintly. Invite him to meet me. Naomi raised an eyebrow. He won't come. Elias looked back at her. He will. Grant received the email that afternoon. Subject. Request for meeting. Elias Monroe's hands shook as he read it. Not a summons. Not a threat. A request. He stared at the screen for a long time, then closed his eyes. For the first time since the slap, Grant felt something unfamiliar settle into his chest. Not anger. Not fear. Shame. He typed a reply. I'll be there. He didn't know it yet, but that meeting would strip him of every excuse he'd ever used and force him to confront the cost of believing power belonged only to people who looked like him. Grant Holloway arrived early. That alone unsettled him. He stood in the lobby of the Monroe Group headquarters, a towering structure of glass and steel that reflected the sky like a mirror and felt impossibly small. The building didn't scream wealth. It didn't need to. Everything about it spoke in quiet confidence. The seamless security, the understated art on the walls, the calm efficiency of people who move with purpose rather than urgency. Grant adjusted his tie for the fifth time in 2 minutes. He had barely slept. The night before had been a loop of headlines, comments, and his own words echoing back at him from strangers' mouths. He'd always believed context mattered, until he saw how naked his actions looked when stripped of excuses. A receptionist smiled politely. Mr. Holloway? Yes, he said quickly. Mr. Monroe will see you now. Grant followed her down a long corridor lined with photographs. Not portraits of Elias Monroe, but images of ports, factories, classrooms, solar fields, and community centers. People working. People building. The absence of self-promotion was unsettling. They stopped at a large wooden door. The receptionist knocked once, then opened it. You may go in. Grant stepped inside. The room was spacious but restrained. No gold, no excess. A long table, shelves of books, a single piece of abstract art on the wall. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. And standing near those windows, hands clasped behind his back, was Elias Monroe. He didn't turn immediately. Grant swallowed. Mr. Monroe, thank you for seeing me. Elias remained facing the window. Do you know why I agreed to meet you? He asked calmly. Grant hesitated. Because of what happened. Yes, Elias said, but more specifically, because of what you thought was happening. Elias turned then. Grant felt the weight of that gaze instantly. Not angry, not triumphant, but piercing in its clarity. The faint bruise on Elias's cheek had faded, but it was still there, a quiet reminder that this meeting wasn't theoretical. Sit, Elias said, gesturing to a chair across the table. Grant sat. For a moment, neither spoke. Silence stretched, intentional, uncomfortable. Elias finally broke it. Why did you hit me? Grant's mouth opened, then closed. He had rehearsed explanations, but none sounded honest enough in this room. I was angry, he said finally. I felt disrespected. Elias nodded. Disrespected by what? Grant shifted. By you not moving. Elias tilted his head slightly. So your respect depends on obedience. Grant winced. I didn't mean, but you did, Elias said gently. You didn't see a man standing there. You saw a boundary that refused to move for you. Grant stared down at the table. The polish reflected his face. Tight, drawn, older than he remembered. I didn't know who you were, Grant said quietly. Elias's eyes sharpened, not with anger, but with focus. Say that again. I didn't know who you were, Grant repeated. If you had known I was wealthy, Elias interrupted, you wouldn't have slapped me. Grant didn't answer. He didn't need to. Elias walked slowly around the table, stopping beside Grant rather than across from him. Do you know how many times I've heard that sentence? He asked. If I had known. Grant swallowed hard. I've heard it from bankers who denied me meetings, Elias continued. From neighbors who called the police. From men who spoke to me like I was furniture. Until someone whispered my name. Elias leaned slightly closer. Do you know what that tells me? Grant shook his head. That your behavior wasn't about anger, Elias said. It was about permission. Grant closed his eyes. You believed you had permission to treat me that way, Elias went on, because you believed I was nobody. The word hung in the air. Grant felt something crack inside him, not loudly, but deeply. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely audible. Elias studied him for a long moment. That's a start, he said. But apologies are easy when consequences arrive. Grant looked up. Then why did you invite me here? Elias returned to the window, gazing out at the city. Because I don't want your fear, he said. And I don't want your career. I want your honesty. He turned back. Tell me the truth, Mr. Holloway. Not the polite truth. Not the legal truth. The real one. Grant's hands trembled slightly. He took a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for years. The truth, he said slowly, is that I've always believed the world had winners and losers, and that people like me were meant to win. Elias said nothing. I was taught that confidence meant dominance, Grant continued. That hesitation was visible weakness, that if you didn't take space, someone else would take it from you. He laughed bitterly. And I never questioned who I was stepping over. Elias listened without interruption. I didn't see you as a man, Grant said. I saw you as an obstacle. And when you didn't move, I reacted the only way I knew how. Silence followed. Elias finally spoke. Do you think you're a bad person? Grant hesitated. I think I've been a protected one. Elias nodded. That's more accurate. He moved back to the table, sitting across from Grant again. Here's what will happen next, Elias said calmly. Grant stiffened. I could press charges, Elias continued. I could sue. I could ensure you never recover professionally. Grant nodded. I know, but I won't, Elias said. Grant's head snapped up. Why? Because you already lost something more valuable, Elias replied. The illusion that power makes you right. Grant felt his throat tighten. Elias slid a folder across the table. Inside that folder is a proposal. Grant opened it cautiously. It wasn't legal paperwork. It was a program. You'll spend the next 12 months working with organizations my foundation funds, Elias said. Community legal clinics, youth mentorship programs, restorative justice initiatives. Grant looked up, confused. You want me to volunteer? No, Elias said. I want you to listen. Grant flipped through the pages. Schedules, locations, names. And if I refuse? Grant asked quietly. Elias met his eyes. Then we proceed the traditional way. Grant understood exactly what that meant. He closed the folder slowly. This won't fix me, Grant said. Elias nodded. It's not meant to. It's meant to expose you. Grant took a long breath. And if I complete it? Elias stood. Then you'll walk away having learned something most people never do. What's that? Grant asked. Elias's voice was calm, but absolute. That respect isn't something you're entitled to, he said. It's something you practice. especially when no one important seems to be watching. Grant nodded slowly. For the first time since the slap, his shoulders sagged, not in defeat, but in surrender. "I accept," he said. Elias extended his hand. Grant stood and shook it. The handshake wasn't firm. It didn't need to be. As Grant turned to leave, Elias spoke one last time. "One more thing, Mr. Holloway." Grant paused. "You didn't slap a CEO," Elias said. "You slapped a man." Grant nodded, eyes burning. "I understand now." As the door closed behind him, Elias returned to the window. Below, the city moved on, unaware that something subtle but significant had shifted within one of its many lives. The final reckoning, however, had not yet arrived. A year can pass quietly, or it can change everything. For Grant Holloway, the days that followed the meeting with Elias Monroe were unlike anything he had known. There were no corner offices, no assistants, no polished conference rooms where his voice carried authority by default. Instead, there were cramped community centers, crowded court hallways, and long evenings spent listening rather than speaking. At first, he treated the program like a sentence. He showed up on time. He followed instructions. He kept his head down. But inside, he resisted. He told himself this was temporary, a detour before rebuilding his life. He still believed, on some level, that the world owed him a second act. That belief didn't survive long. At a legal aid clinic, Grant sat across from a black mother fighting an eviction notice she didn't understand. He watched a teenager explain how being loud in school had earned him a permanent label. He listened to men and women describe moments that sounded disturbingly similar to his own, except they were always on a receiving end. Over and over, he heard variations of the same sentence. "They didn't see me as a person." Each story felt like a mirror. Grant began to recognize himself not as the exception, but as the pattern. One evening, after a long day, he sat alone in his apartment and replayed the video again. Not with defensiveness this time, but with clarity. He noticed details he had ignored before. The calm in Elias Monroe's voice, the way the crowd had frozen, the ease with which he himself had resorted to violence. For the first time, Grant didn't look away. Meanwhile, Elias Monroe remained largely absent from public view. He continued to run his companies in the background, refusing interviews, declining commentary on the incident. To some, his silence looked like indifference. To those who knew him, it was intention. Change, Elias believed, didn't require spectacle. But the city hadn't forgotten. The video became required viewing in corporate trainings, discussed in classrooms, dissected online, not as entertainment, but as evidence. The narrative shifted over time. It stopped being about a slap and became about assumption. Who we believe matters. Who we believe belongs. Who we believe we're allowed to hurt. Elias watched all of it from a distance, measuring not outrage, but reflection. 12 months later, Grant stood once again in the Monroe Group building. He looked different, not dramatically. No cinematic transformation, but the sharp edges had softened. His posture was less rigid, his eyes less entitled. He held a thin folder this time. Elias greeted him with the same calm presence as before. "You completed the program." "Yes," Grant replied. "And more." Elias gestured for him to sit. "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness," Grant said. "I came to return this." He slid the folder across the table. Inside was a resignation letter from an industry board position Grant had recently been offered. Elias raised an eyebrow. "Why give it up?" "Because I realized I didn't earn it," Grant said. "Not yet." Elias studied him for a long moment. "And what do you think you've earned?" Elias asked. Grant took a breath. "Responsibility." Elias leaned back. "Explain." "I've started working full-time with the same organizations from the program," Grant said. "Not as a leader, not as a spokesperson, just as help." Elias nodded slowly. "Do you expect recognition?" Grant shook his head. "No, I expect discomfort." A faint smile crossed Elias's face. "You've learned something," Elias said. Grant hesitated. "There's one thing I still don't understand." "What's that?" Elias asked. "Why you chose this," Grant said. "Why not destroy me?" Elias looked out the window again, the city stretching endlessly beyond. Because destruction would have been easy, he said, and because too many people already believe humiliation is justice. He turned back. I wanted you to feel what it's like to be seen, without the armor. Grant nodded. I don't ask you to trust me, Grant said. I only ask you to believe I'm trying. Elias stood and extended his hand again. I believe you're no longer hiding, he said. They shook hands, this time with understanding. Weeks later, Elias attended a small community event without announcement or security spectacle. He stood near the back, listening as a young speaker addressed the room. Grant Holloway, not introduced as a former executive, not as a cautionary tale, just as a volunteer. Grant spoke about accountability, not as punishment, but as practice, about the danger of confusing power with permission, about how easy it is to believe you're right when the world has always made room for you. Elias listened quietly. No one recognized him. That was fine. As the event ended, Elias slipped out unnoticed. Outside, the city moved as it always had, busy, loud, and different. But something had changed. Not the skyline, not the systems, not all at once. One man had learned to see. Another had chosen restraint over revenge. And a city, watching closely, had been reminded of a simple truth. You never really know who you're standing in front of.